Now, one other name, of course, that's in there is Barb Roos. We have a clip we're going to be looking at pretty close, quick coming up here. Barb taught for I'm not sure how many years. She was
I
there
think
when
it
I
was
was. She was
35 years.
I think
35
it
years.
was. I'm counting 40.
40.
So,
Okay.
now,
Oh, so she was there before she was like official.
she was adjuncting when I was there. It's between
Okay.
72, and I think it was in 77 that they offered her a full-time position. So,
77,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I came there in 78. She was my advisor and just seemed like she had been there, probably had been since, almost the beginning of it. So was a tremendous force. And I think that force is still felt through all the students and staff and faculty who were there, because she was there for such a long time and had a great impact. She did a documentary about WJC, and we're going to see a clip coming up here. And if you want to see the whole presentation, we're going to put a link on here as well. But let's just look at a clip talking about the conversation that was William James.
These are not the ivory towers of a traditional American college, nor are these traditional halls of ivy. William James College was founded in 1971 as an alternative college. Our inspiration, the philosopher William James, the psychologist, the artist, and teacher William James. He taught us that we learn in order to act. At James, we tried to merge theory with practice and balance individualism with a commitment to community.
The qualities that I saw in people were sort of self-initiative, willing to follow things through, willing to take risks, for willingness to fail, and a desire to really do what it took to get the job done, which in many times meant a lot of work and a lot of redoing.
Well, somebody else I should mention too who was in that clip is Deanna Morris. I actually was in Deanna's first animation class that she taught in 79. Who's also been very involved in the college going along there.
I came to Grand Valley in 1979. I had a background in alternative education. In fact, my first master's was from Goddard College. In fact, that's the only thing that would bring me to the Midwest. These were some of the buzzwords of the time. Apparently, this is what I look like today, according to a 7-year-old.
Going back to the William James days, because as Gerb was mentioning earlier, it was a cluster college concept. It was very kind of unique at the time. It's what drew a lot of attention to at least the film video areas where a lot of people came into it. But it really was a different approach because it was a small college. There was a lot of great, interactivity. The community was very strong, and I think it's you realize it's your community, it's your social group. Later on, professionally, you call it your network, but it's the same thing. It's the people that know you, that you work with, that you have contact with. Let's go back to folks who were involved who knew William James, and tell me what it was that that really fit, the way a film and video program fit with that whole philosophy.
I came to Grand Valley State Colleges specifically to go to William James College from Washington, D.C. in 1972. I wanted to go into social relations. However, about halfway through, I took a 15-credit class called Community Video Workshop, taught by Bob Conroe. I think there were 12 or 15 people in it. Anyway, it was the most exciting thing to me, and I pursued my arts and media concentration. Anyway, I have saved a couple of my textbooks I thought you'd want to check out. The Spaghetti City Video Manual, Signs of the Times, and the Guerrilla Television book, which was $3.95 as a textbook, not bad.
one of the things that I think was really unique about James is that the you sometimes couldn't tell the faculty from the students. Now, this was also back to the social period, because you had these returning warriors from the Vietnam War, so they were older. There was also the women's movement, and a lot of women who had been, raised in a traditional family culture decided that maybe that wasn't going to fulfill them. And so there were older women that came back to go to college. So it was a very diverse community in that sense from an age standpoint. And also because of the nature of the times, and so much new stuff is going on. It's like alternative was this key term. Alternative everything, alternative counterculture also was a term, like against the dominant culture of the time. But so faculty would sometimes, and many times, teach courses that they weren't necessarily had majored in or were trained in because they were interested. I think one of my important teachers there was Bob Conroe, who was an English PhD, a writer, written books, and he was fascinated by the video movement, and so he taught courses, but he didn't know the first thing about making videos, and that was sort of this sense of we were all on this journey together. That's what made it so exciting, and the life experience of people. And I think the other thing that for me was so powerful was William James felt like a matriarchy. It was the women that were running the college. We had Adrian Tinsley was the dean. There was an assistant dean, Rhonda Rivera, who was an attorney. And then Barbara, of course, and Tony and Deanna. It was a really, it was what the women's movement could really say, let the women run things and see how they do. And it was an incredible experience for me. And, this idea that faculty and students, you couldn't tell them apart. I think that's what kind of led me and Barbara to become partners and friends. We collaborated in film, and, then we collaborated in having a family together. And so, we were filmmakers together, and at always different levels of experience, and that's the beauty of film. It's a tribal experience, is what I think of.
Central to the idea of the college was the integration of theory and practice, and insistence that what we learn be useful in the world.
Well, part of the dynamic back then, too, was that you had on campus both a radio station and TV station. So a lot of the people who were in the program back in those days in the 70s, 80s, either were then trying out things at WGVU. I worked there for 3.5 years doing, a lot of it was not really film work, but it's doing sports, it's doing production and learning to work with a team. It was a great way to learn. So when you got out in the work world, you had that work experience. Also saw some very experimental stuff going on. Walter Wright was a professor there who would come to the studio at night with some of the students and just try some very different video projects they were working on. And also the radio station on campus, and I'm going to admit that I just blanked out what the call letters used to be before it was
WSRX.
SRX, Student Run Experimental. And it was experimental, it was student run. They tried a lot of different things. There were dramas, there were daily programs, but those two areas gave a lot of students kind of a way to then use the energy and some of the ideas they had both in video or on radio to kind of experiment, have fun with things, learn, and it was a great part of that dynamic.
We had a small studio in the basement of Manitou Hall, and we did an old black and white studio. We had 2 blunder tongue video cameras, television cameras on studio heads and peds. And our headsets were like those kind you see in the old movies, the old operators had, And we had what we called a ka-chunk switcher. So when the director said, ready one, take one, you heard this ka-chunk. And we call it the ka-chunk switcher. But it was in the basement of Manitou. And most all of us ended up working up at WGVC. I was one of the announcers who did all the voiceovers and the IDs and so on. So we had a lot of fun doing that. We worked in master control, production control, studio cameras, and so on. It was great training for us all to get our hands on the stuff. And so concentration was a great program.
I started after William James, but a lot of my colleagues, again, were part of it. And I felt kind of envious, like I had missed something that was really cool. And I think you get that from listening to Gerb and Tim talk about the experience. It was a much smaller place. It was very experimental. It was, literally an experimental college. And insofar as it was laid the groundwork for the School of Communications, that some of that aspect did carry through.